Hi, my name is Mike Dillard, and this is Self-Made Man, the podcast for men who want to leave their mark on the world and create a legacy of honor, integrity, and achievement in every aspect of their lives. I'm glad you're here, and once again, it is time to forge your destiny. Welcome back, everybody. Mike Dillard here, and I would like to start off by apologizing for the absolutely crappy sound quality of today's intro, because I am actually on the road and recording this in a hotel room on my fancy iPhone headphones, which is not awesome. The good news is that the rest of the episode is recorded back in the studio and sounds absolutely fantastic. So today's show is going to be awesome. If you would like to smile more, laugh more, and just live a happier life in every way on a daily basis, then you are going to love this episode. Back in 2008, Neil Pasricha was serving as the director of leadership development for Walmart when his world fell apart after a sudden divorce and the death of a very close friend. So in order to pull himself out of this depression, he had an idea. He decided to write down one simple pleasure in life that he was grateful for each day for the next 1,000 days in a row. And the result was a little blog called 1,000 Awesome Things, and it would change his life and impact the lives of millions of people around the world. That little blog would eventually lead to the Book of Awesome, which has gone on to sell millions of copies, a TED Talk with over 2.6 million views, and a new mission in life, which is to bring your personal happiness and my personal happiness to the forefront of our lives. And so that is why he joins us here today. You see, a few years ago, Neil fell in love again, and he got remarried. And on the airplane home from his honeymoon, his wife told him that she was pregnant. And Neil did what he did last time. He sat down and he started writing again. But this time, the result was a 300-page letter written to his unborn son, sharing the 9 secrets to finding true happiness. And that letter was actually just released in the form of a book titled The Happiness Equation. So today, Neil is here to serve as our tour guide as he helps share the principles that you can start implementing today to experience more happiness in every area of your life, which is one of the most awesome, worthy goals that I think any of us could ever strive for and hope to achieve. So please help me welcome Neil Pasricha. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Dillard here, and today we're going to talk about a topic that has been on my mind specifically for the last year or two on a very personal level, which is happiness. How do you create more happiness in your life on a daily basis? Because as I've come to learn specifically over the last couple of years, that is ultimately the real win in life. How many days can you spend as happy as you possibly can? And so we've got an amazing guest joining us here today to talk about this topic, Neil Pasricha. So Neil, thank you so much for joining us. Mike, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. You did a great job and flattered to be on the show. Oh, thank you so much. Well, I'm, as I just mentioned, really excited about speaking with you today about this topic. We've got a huge audience of entrepreneurs, super driven A-types who are not really satisfied unless they're pushing their lives and reaching new, reaching new heights of success and accomplishing their goals on a daily and yearly basis. And something that can really get overlooked is the simple quality of life, that you live day to day and the amount of happiness that you have. And I can honestly say for me in the past specifically, happiness was directly correlated to the amount of success my business was having. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older and now, approaching 40, that's started to change a little bit, as I think it naturally does. But this is something that you really went through, as well in a very big way. And so for those people who are listening to this who aren't familiar with your amazing story, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to really bring everyone up to speed on how you ended up becoming one of the world's most respected authorities on this topic. Sure, Mike. Well, for me, I'm 36 years old, based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. My story sort of begins in the late 1960s when my mom and my dad came to Canada as immigrants. My dad was from India and was one of the first high school physics teachers ever because they had never taught physics as a separate subject before. They just taught science.
And so he came over with this big bushy hair and long sideburns, which he has never changed to this day, and came as one of the first high school physics teacher. My mom followed soon after from Nairobi, Kenya, as an accountant working for General Motors, because the big GM head office in Canada was in Oshawa, Ontario, a suburb of Toronto, which is where I was born. My sister and I grew up there, had very, very quiet suburban childhoods, taking for granted all of the things that, my parents just couldn't take for granted, like plentiful shelves at the grocery store and power always on at our homes and access to hospitals and dentists and things that we just didn't know without because we'd always had those things. I mention that, though, because my parents did have a tremendous sense of wide-eyed wonder throughout my childhood, and that's something I feel very, very connected to. My dad would marvel at the stickers on the fruits at the grocery store saying, like, can you believe it? These are dates from Morocco, and like, this kiwi came from New Zealand on a boat. Like, he would talk like that because they didn't have that growing up. So I got this childlike perception of the world in my childhood from my parents, who were also seeing snow for the first time and having hamburgers for the first time, etc. So I went to Queen's University and did a business degree from 98 to 2002, exited that school and spent a lot of time writing there for the Campus Humor newspaper. Decided I was going to go headfirst into this comedy writing career and went to New York City, got a job with a comedy writing startup in Brooklyn, working for $10 a day, which didn't quite cover my Lower East Side apartment. But and then quickly realized that I really hated it, actually, because it became extrinsically motivated. It turned this love of reading and writing I had as a child and at university into something that's like, write 800 words about The Sopranos by 4 p.m. with like this guy, Tony, that you never met before. And I found that the joy of comedy writing left. So I said, okay, you know what? I'll leave this and I'll go pursue a business career. I went to Procter & Gamble, got a job in marketing for CoverGirl, Max Factor makeup. I was 21 years old at the time. I can tell you everything about the lengthening, separating, and volumizing properties of mascara to this day. Sadly, not a good first date conversation. Women are scared off by the guy that asks them what kind of mascara they're wearing.
Right, yeah.
Say, you could go with L'Oreal. It might be better for your lashes. No, you don't get slapped, but you get like I'll call you.
Right.
Did that for a year. It didn't go well, actually, and I can talk about that later. But I guess I thought marketing was a PowerPoint job, and it turned into an Excel job. So I think I strategically quit just before they let me go. And I went and opened up a Quiznos sub franchise with my dad when the franchise was in its sort of early days.
Yeah.
No one had heard of it. And I opened up a restaurant, learned a lot from that, sold the restaurant a couple years later, went down to Harvard Business School, did my MBA, 2005, 2007, came out. And at that point, started, I think, the story that any listener who has heard of my story may then know, which was the next 10 years, from age 26 to 36, I spent climbing the corporate ladder at Walmart, working up my way to project manager to our CEO in Walmart Canada, and as eventually director of leadership development. Meanwhile, in my personal life, I fell in love, got married, and a couple years into that marriage, my wife said, this isn't working for me. And I'm sorry to say that, but I don't feel like I'm in love with you anymore. And before I had got over that blow, a few weeks later, my best friend Chris took his own life. He committed suicide and had been battling mental illness for some time. So it was in those swirly days of processing a divorce in my late 20s, processing the loss of a friend, working an office job in Toronto, that I started a blog called 1000awesomethings.com. Me knowing nothing about how to do that, but literally typing how to start a blog into Google and pressing I'm feeling lucky turned into, eventually, over the next 1,000 days, a 50 million hit, 3-time kind of Webby award-winning website, 1000 Awesome Things, that produced a number of books called The Book of Awesome, Book of Even More Awesome, all kinds of Krusty the Clown type brand extensions like journals and apps and calendars and so on. And you know what? 5 years ago, Mike, the story ended there. And it was like, hey, he's the Pied Piper of awesome things. And he gave a TED Talk about awesome things. Ta-da. But truthfully now, here I am in my kind of mid to late 30s. I can look back at that time and say, holy cow, I was so unhealthy. I hadn't processed the divorce properly, the loss of my friend. I'd lost a ton of weight due to stress. I was living alone. I certainly wasn't eating well or exercising or dating or anything. And I'm being put on the face of 3-minute long TV segments as tell us more about flipping to the cold side of the pillow and bakery air and hitting a string of green lights. So I'm like this like awesome guy, but I hadn't processed any of the pain. So
well, let me stop you there and ask you real quick. The blog, I'm assuming was a conscious effort on your part to focus on something you were grateful for on a daily basis in order to really pull you out of that funk. Am I making that assumption correctly or not?
Absolutely. I was looking for some place to be happy. As you and I both know, the news, TV, like work, like nothing was showing me a positive thing. So I thought if I wrote about fat baseball players or finding $5 in your pocket for a few minutes before midnight every night, then it would be the last thing I thought about before I went to sleep, trying to prevent myself from having sleepless nights as I process all the
And how did, what happened?
Well, it turns out that there's an incredibly famous study by Emmons and McCullough on if you write down 5 gratitudes a week as opposed to 5 hassles or 5 events, over 10 weeks, you train your brain to be happier. And I happened to do it for 200 weeks, right? 1,000, one every weekday. So I found that my mood and my perspective of the world was changing. It stopped me from hitting kind of rock bottom. I didn't turn to any major vices. I didn't, contemplate my life and things like that. It moved me to a place where I think I'm like, a 5 or 6 out of 10. And I found that was very helpful. But truthfully, the biggest source of our happiness is our social relationships. And because I had a huge absence of those, it wasn't until I eventually met someone new and fell in love and kind of made friends in downtown Toronto that I felt my health, my true happiness kind of blossoming.
So that led to the book, and I really think it's everybody needs to go watch your TED Talk, which I watched recently, and I thought it was really quite humorous how you framed it, where this is a project that you strictly started for yourself, and then it kind of grew organically, where your parents read it, they were your 2 biggest fans, and then it turned into a few other people, and eventually went viral, which turned into your first best-selling book. But what you've been working on recently is how do you, again, consciously and mechanically put practices into your daily life and your habits that lead to more happiness. And so that's something I'm super excited to dive into.
Thanks, Mike. Well, the crazy thing happened was that I wrote these things about the observation of awesome, right? Little simple pleasures, snow days, and it was super fun. But then, as I met someone new, fell in love, and got married again to this woman named Leslie, who I am married to. And on the flight home from our honeymoon a couple years ago, she told me, I'm not feeling well. She bought a pregnancy test on our layover and told me on the plane that she was pregnant. I then suddenly thought, well, I can't hand my kid the Book of Awesome. If I get hit by a bus in 5 or 10 years, like what literally does he or she need to do? Like what steps? I have more of a, the male kind of classical logical brain. I'm like, no, what's the action manual for becoming happy? And there's 75,000 books on happiness, but I couldn't find one that was like, here's the 9 steps, or here's the 5 things you need to do. So I wrote a 300-page letter to my unborn child, which turned into my new book, The Happiness Equation. So actually in that book you have on your desk there, if you look at the bottom of the copyright page in 2-point font, it still says the first line that I wrote in that letter, which is, Dear baby, I wanted you to have this in case I didn't have a chance to tell you. Love, Dad. And so this book is my attempt to gather, collect, process, synthesize, and pull together in one clear stew, here's what you can do to be happier. Because I know it's really hard. And all the studies say that 20% of our population is happy today, which is the exact same number it was in 1955 when Professor Myers at Hope College first started tracking this. And so it's like, how do I give my kid the best shot of being in that 20% of people that call themselves very happy?
Well, the next question I have to ask is how? Let's dive in.
Yeah.
Because
what do you do? Oh my gosh. Well, here's the thing. Okay. Well, here's the thing. It's not as hard as people think. And I did say, Professor Myers at Hope College has been studying this largest longitudinal survey ever on happiness for from 1955 to today shows that despite our increases in wealth, technology, food, education, everything else, happiness has flatlined. And if you go to Google and you type in how to be, like literally just those 3 words, the drop down says happy first. And funnily enough, number 2, 3, and 4 are rich, pretty, model, and real estate agent. I guess that's 2 to 5. That tells you everything you need to know about what we all want as people, how to be but happy is number 1. And so then the essential baseline premise that I'd love to share with your listeners is really a mind shift change between 6 words. Think about the 6 words your parents taught you when you were a kid. My parents, maybe because they were immigrants, maybe because it was everything they knew, they said it goes like this. Great work, those 2 words, points to a big success, those 2 words, which points to being happy, those 2 words. Those are the 6 words. You do great work, like you study hard, then you have a big success, like you get good grades, and then you be happy because you got into a great school. Or you work really hard, then you get promoted, then you be happy. But Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky at University of California in 2005 put out a fantastic research paper with a couple of colleagues that shows the model is actually flipped. This is maybe the most important piece of happiness literature ever. I cannot take any credit for producing it, but here's what it showed. It shows that if you be happy first, then the arrow points to great work. You're 31% more productive. You have 37% higher sales. You're 3 times more creative, 40% more likely to get a promotion in the next year. And then the arrow points to big success. Again, the model is switched. It goes be happy to great work to big success. So it's one thing to sort of be invited on your podcast today and say, cool, everyone got it. Like, just be happy. But at least I can say it's the lever to everything else in your life that you want. Like in terms of positive outcome generators, like being happy is the greatest single investment you can make. And so what I do in the first secret of the happiness equation is I say, okay, if you will give me just 20 minutes a day, then I will give you 5 simple exercises. You can choose any one of them. You don't have to do 5. Just pick one. If you can do one of these 5 for 20 days in a row, you'll develop a new happiness habit. So if you're up for it, I'll give them to you real quick.
Yeah, well, and before you dive into that, this really reminds me, and I don't know where this comes from, but it's just been a saying that's been within our circle of friends for a while, which is the whole concept of do, have, be, which I think is the summary of what you just, if I do this, then I'll have the Ferrari and then I'll be happy, which doesn't work. And the way you reframe that is, I think, what is it? Be, do, have, I believe is,
and I think that's great. You're right. Yeah. If you be happy, then you do great work. So then you have the big success at the end.
Right.
That's a great way to put it. And I thought I was all smart for distilling it down to 6 words, and then you quickly slice it in half and made it 3 words.
I can't take credit for it.
Like a shoulder shrug or like a wink, they'll have even improved on our model here. But yeah, you're right. It's like, okay. So I think, here's what I think, Mike, is that 20, 30 years ago, nobody had a gym card in their wallet the way that everybody has a gym card in their wallet today. And statements like, yeah, I want to run on the treadmill for 20 minutes at lunch, or I'm hoping to do a quick resistance workout before bed. You hear people say that at work, just in general. It's like just a part of our days. We all have a second pair of shoes. You've got a membership somewhere. But no one yet has that same nomenclature for, I want to squeeze in, 20 minutes of meditation at lunch between our meetings at work. And hopefully tonight I'll be able to write down my 5 gratitudes with my wife, because everyone just assumes that those things are going to pay off. But it feels like, I think we're at the tipping point of people having the time, certainly a lot of people scratching at the top of Maslow's hierarchy here, of saying, okay, how can I just make a small investment into my longer term happiness? And that's where I think, that's why I put this as the first secret in my book, because it's meant to just be like, start there with the little 20-minute exercise, and then everything else I recommend or that I learned and that I wanted to share, it can follow. But you have to at least consciously know and believe that happiness is a choice. And if I give myself a little bit of time each day, I can do some of these. You can call them hacks, you can call them exercises, in order to just make sure that my brain is in a positive state for the rest of the day.
So can you dive into specifics on what you personally do?
Yeah, sure. Really quickly, one is a 20-minute walk, ideally through nature. Professor Michael Babiak and team in the American Psychosomatic Society showed that even 3 20-minute brisk walks a week actually outperform antidepressants. And a second test group that was doing both the walking and taking the antidepressants. It sounds so simple, but the vast majority of us do not do a 20-minute brisk walk a day. So that's the first thing. I try to do that every day. Second one is called the 20-minute replay. This is a University of Texas study called How Do I Love Thee? Let Me Count the Words. It shows that if you journal for 20 minutes a day about one positive experience you had during the day, you're actually 50% more likely to stay in your long-term relationship past a 3-month point. This is a university study, so that was a really long relationship length. But also your mind gets to relive that moment 2 more times. It relives it when you write it, and it relives it if you read it again. So a 20-minute journaling exercise is what I was doing on my blog, without really realizing it. But for anybody else, this is the classic gratitude journal or some simple way to write down like, hey, here's a couple of things that happened to me today. That's 2. And then the third one I'll just say really quickly is committing 5 random acts of kindness a week. It is true almost more than anything else that doing something small for other people, and it can be as simple as buying someone a coffee, actually makes us feel better about ourselves, right? We feel like I'm the coffee buying guy. I improve my own sense of self. So those are 3 of the exercises. I don't want to, kind of take up all our time going through them, but they're simple. That's the point. They're real simple. And at first you hear them and you're like, well, I'm sure I do all those things. But if I don't, me, Neil, if I don't consciously think about them, I could pretty quickly have a day where I didn't get out for my walk and I kind of forgot to write down for a few minutes about something I'm grateful for. Never mind doing something nice for somebody else because I was wrapped up in myself. So they're real simple and they're a huge, huge help for becoming happy first.
Something that you talk about in the book, I think is really important to cover for this audience specifically, but what is the difference between success and happiness?
They truthfully couldn't be further apart because both words are nebulous. Okay, so they are, in studies, happiness is actually called subjective well-being. It is a question on how happy are you now and how happy are you at the end of this test. And success is, for most people, a placeholder for happiness. You and I both probably grew up thinking, again, the straight A's or the big job title or the big paycheck, that's parallel to happiness. But, and I don't want to project on you, but certainly my experience with being around a lot of CEOs, with seeing all these, famous authors and famous speakers, et cetera, backstage, and realizing, sadly, that they were no happier than I was, and that in fact the geniuses were not at the next level with the secrets of the lost ark in their pocket or anything. Then it becomes quickly clear to realize that actually success, external validation, extrinsically motivated and generated success, has nothing to do with subjective well-being, internal, intrinsic, personal sense of how happy you are. And again, the model we have is backwards, right? We think you work hard, you have the success, then you get happy. Actually, it's flipped. So if you're happy first, then you're doing great and productive work. And then however you define success will come afterwards. And that can be in terms of your relationships. It can be in terms of wealth. It can be, hey, I want to get promoted. So maybe that will happen to you, but it certainly comes after happiness, not beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. If I think back to my early years as an entrepreneur when I was failing at basically everything, when you attach success to an accomplishment and you're not reaching that accomplishment or, reaching your goals, it just leads to feelings of, frustration, doubt, anger, whatever it may be. But it puts you in a really negative scarcity-based mindset, which is never going to, help you actually accomplish the goals that you're looking to bring about anyway. And the moment that I let go of all of that in my early years, about 10 years ago, and I just said, you know what, screw it. I am not going to worry about making, any amount of money this week or this month, and I'm going to let go of all of the pressure that I'm putting on myself to accomplish these goals. And I'm just going to focus on helping people and giving value in any way that I can. That is when everything for me changed. And I literally went from broken waiting tables to a much more positive mindset, putting out value to the world, getting, positive feedback back from that. And it just created this upward spiral that completely changed my life.
That's an amazing story, right? And that is exactly what all the research suggests will happen. The hard part for probably you and for other people listening is, how do you actually take that leap, right? Like, how'd you go from waiting the tables broke to saying, I'm not going to care about money in the short term. I'm going to focus on value. That's very difficult for people to do.
Yeah, I think it was surrendering to the fact that what I'd been attempting to do for the previous 6 years was not working.
yeah, exactly. It's like you picture like a ram butting against a bunch of doors, and you're just like, okay, we'll try door number 18.
Yeah, and I hit that point of literally emotional and mental exhaustion where I just had to surrender. I just couldn't do it anymore, and it's sad that it took that long for me to have that epiphany, but I'm grateful that it eventually came around. And these days, over the last couple of years specifically, have gone through the biggest business and personal challenges of my life, and it's easy to get into a habit, mentally in an emotional place where you just wake up in a certain mood. And after you're doing that, 30, 60, days in a row, a year in a row, 2 years in a row, that takes over as your default mental state. And if that's a negative place, it's a really shitty place to be. And so, I've had to really consciously work on that over the last, I'd say, 6 months. And I've just started with something really, really simple, because I'm not hugely great when it comes to setting up disciplined routines for myself in the morning. It's interesting. I've always, which is why I'm an entrepreneur, been naturally rebellious against any kind of structure, which is like, I don't want a job. I don't want people telling myself what I have to do, including myself. So routines have been tough, but I've done one thing, which is to lay in bed or when I'm in the shower, just force myself to smile for at least 1 to 2 minutes straight.
Wow.
And that makes a huge difference for the rest of the day.
So, I mean, you of course, you've read the studies that show that, right? Like that the smiling can, reverse engineer your brain to putting itself into a positive state. That's amazing. And what a great example of doing something that, kind of feels weird probably at first, but has a positive outcome. And Mike, this made me think of the fact that, I'm a guy and, I'm married. So my wife is more on the emotional side. I'm more on the logical side. And one thing that really helped me understand and accept the fact that my brain, without sort of the classic like bowling lane sort of bumpers on the side, would naturally default to a negative state, was actually understanding the evolutionary history of our minds and sort of, in the research for this book, sort of uncovering the simple truth, which I don't know why I never realized before, that our species has been around 300,000 years. And for 299,950 of them, we just did 3 things. Number 1, look for a problem. Number 2, find the problem. And number 3, solve the problem, right? Like it's avoid the saber-toothed tiger chasing you in the savannah and find a mate before you die at age 30. Like the point is, like, our brains have actually been trained for survival. And if we look at the model of the world we've designed for ourselves, everything's still like that. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get the blood test back from the doctor. I'm like, I'm scanning for high cholesterol. I get the math test back from the teacher. I'm like, where's the one I got wrong? I mean, every single thing in our world is looking for problems, finding problems, and correcting problems. So you think, okay, I have this incredibly complex object. The universe is most complex object hidden between my ears. It takes 3% of my body's mass and uses 30 to 35% of my body's energy, my brain. And it's naturally looking for problems because that's what's led to its survival for 299,950 years. Only now I'm in this, hashtag first world problem kind of place where I'm like, my parents loved me and I am in an environment where I was lucky enough to have some education and to sort of meet some great friends. Now I'm like, why am I unhappy now? And that's where the evolutionary history gives me peace, because then I'm like, it's not my fault. My brain is designed that way. No wonder it's work to try to train it otherwise, whether that's smiling in bed for 2 minutes, doing a random act of kindness, having a 20-minute meditation, journaling for 20 minutes, etc. It's like I've got to retrain this lens on my brain to see happiness first, because every single day it wakes up thinking the opposite.
Well, it's interesting too, because if you think back, just 100, 200 years ago, the amount of threats that you ran into on a daily basis that triggered that primal part of your brain, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, right? Like you might see a snake or a spider or some kind of threat to your life that would trigger that. But what's interesting today, literally just between the television and Facebook, that part of your brain is probably being triggered 100 times a day.
Wow, yeah.
Like if you just scroll through your timeline and all of the sensational negative headlines with politics today and terrorism or whatever it may be, you just scroll through 100 feeds on your timeline, 50 of them are probably going to trigger that part of your brain. And so we're super hyper stimulated when it comes to all of the negativity that we're being exposed to on a daily basis. It's happening on the other side of the planet that has nothing to do with us, with our lives where we're at today. And so it's really a battle. And if you don't face this in a conscious way and create new habits and processes around this on a daily basis, you're going to feel the effects of that.
Totally. And, Leslie and I came back from our honeymoon. We were lucky enough to go away for 3 weeks, and I didn't listen to the news. My sort of morning ritual of listening to the news and flipping through the newspaper, like I wasn't able, nor did I want to do that on the honeymoon. And when I came back and I listened to the morning radio for the first time on my way to Walmart, it was like sharp, scissors in my ears. So I turned it off and I rode to work in silence. And near the end of the ride, I had an interesting idea, which I recorded on my cell phone in like the audio notes. And then the next day I was like, maybe I'll download an interesting podcast talking about creativity. And it's true what they say about taking a news fast, because if our brains indeed can be controlled by our exercises and behaviors, the ones we're talking about today, they certainly can be controlled the other way by, of course, whatever negativity happens in the world. And in fact, I've quoted her already, but Sonia Lyubomirsky has a theory. She's the happiness psychologist I quoted earlier, that 10% of our happiness is based on our circumstances. Okay. 50% is based on our genetic set point, which means there are people slightly happier or unhappier, but 40% is based on our intentional activities, which means that what you do is 4 times more important than what happens to you. So regardless of who wins the election or what sort of terrible stories on the front page of the newspaper that day, you can still control a disproportionately high amount of the rest of your day from there if you do a little investment in it yourself.
What advice do you have for leaders out there in the world who are, putting out positive work, making a positive impact on the world when it comes to dealing with criticism?
So secret number 2 in the book, I talk about, do this and criticism can't touch you. And I share the story about how with the Book of Awesome and 1,000 Awesome Things, I became addicted to extrinsic motivators. We start almost everything for intrinsic reasons. We maybe are attracted to the marketing job at Procter & Gamble because we think it'll be interesting. But very quickly, you're surrounded by blog counters, bestseller lists, performance evaluations, a salary, which is commensurate with the title or role you have. And so we lose track of that. In fact, all the studies show that extrinsic motivators literally and mentally block you from seeing your intrinsic motivators. So they did the study on young girls teaching piano lessons, and they said to one group, hey, teach the girls how to play piano. You've got as much time as you want, ideally half an hour, and you're going to feel like a great teacher. And they told the other group of girls, hey, teach them piano, have as long as you want, ideally half an hour, and when you're done, you get a ticket to the movies. And of course, the girls that got rewarded with the ticket to the movies were sharper, more frustrated, left exactly when the half an hour was over, became upset more easily. The extrinsic motivator ruined them. And so when it comes to dealing with criticism, we have to remember the 4 simple words of do it for you. Write down and recall your intrinsic motivator reason for doing it in the first place, and make sure that's front and center. Am I doing the podcast because I love talking to interesting people? Or am I in this job because I love making this type of customer happy because I am one of those customers too, or whatever it is. Otherwise, extrinsic motivators quickly destabilize us and get us focused on the wrong things for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I absolutely see how that could be the case as well. And that leads me to another question that I know you've discussed as well at length that I'm really curious about is, when it comes to retirement and let's just say regret, and when you get older in life, what are the secrets to making sure that you're happy when you're reaching those, years in your life so that you're not looking back with regret?
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. Listen, I have a secret number 4 in the happiness equation called the dream we all have that's completely wrong. And it's turning into a pretty polarizing issue. I'm getting punched up pretty good by, some retirement advocates. But I actually go so far as to say that nobody should ever retire. Ever. Because truthfully, when you dig into the research on happiness and frankly on retirement, it's really clear what comes out. Retirement was invented in 1889, not that long ago, in Germany, when Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who has the coolest name ever, actually said, okay, cool, if you're 65 years old or older and you're infirm, like you actually need care, you can, if you want to, leave the workforce and we'll pay you a little bit of money until you die at age 67, which was the average lifespan in Germany then. The problem is he actually created 65 as a number that, of course, a lot of Western countries, Canada, the US, and many others copied. Here I am today in Toronto looking at headlines saying, oh, should the prime minister change, the age for retirement from 65 to 67, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, no. It shouldn't be like that at all because truthfully, the healthiest and happiest societies in the world, like those of Okinawa, as National Geographic researchers discovered, they live 7 years longer than Americans, and they literally have no word for retirement. Like nothing in their language describes the concept of stopping work completely. Instead, they have this beautiful word called ikigai, Ikigai, which roughly means the reason you wake up in the morning. And so what I gave to Leslie for Christmas last year was like a little card we leave on our bedside tables, and she wrote down to educate leaders who make a difference in the world because she's a teacher. And I wrote down to increase happiness inside organizations because I've been working on that, or to finish the script for the happiness equation, whatever it is that I'm working on at the time. And the ikigai creates a sense of purpose. It's one of what I call the 4 S's to meaningful work. They are social fulfillment, friends and family, and having those relationships, structure in our days and our weeks, a reason to get up, stimulation of learning new things, and the ikigai, or what I call the story, doing something bigger than yourself, being part of a community or a high-level purpose, often called in a company the mission statement, that you can mentally get behind. Those 4 S's, social, structure, stimulation, and story, have a far greater effect on our happiness than retirement, which Fortune magazine says is the second most dangerous year of your life after the year you're born. And everyone's got a story of somebody who retired and kind of went kaput not long after, including me. My guidance counselor in high school who had a heart attack the week after. So that was a long way of saying what the happiness research actually suggests is that you should never retire, but instead forget salary, just focus on the 4 S's, social, structure, stimulation, and story, and make sure that whatever you're doing, whether that's nonprofit work for a church or community group, work for a Fortune 500, whatever, you always have those S's because they allow you to be happy over the long term. As William Safire said in the New York Times, when you're through changing, only then are you through.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially when you consider the fact that the world is going to look unbelievably different by the time you and I are at 65. There will be medicines that will, be able to grow us new organs and replace anything that, we have going wrong with us health-wise, which means our expected lifespan is probably going to be well over 100 if we're not downloading our brains into computers by then, which,
exactly.
According to Diamandis and other, those other guys, that's going to be about that time when that's going to be happening.
I mean, I saw the movie Her with, Joaquin Phoenix, and I was like, that doesn't seem that far away.
No. No.
And you're right. We all live way longer, and we apparently want to retire way earlier. There's a lot of stories of people, living off soup for 20 years, and they can retire at 40 years old or whatever. And I so actively come out against that theory, saying so strongly that at least how we talk about retirement, the idea of playing golf every day or sailing into the sunset, that concept is really broken.
Well, what I find really interesting to consider and think about is that 30 years from now, computers, robots, AI, whatever technology is present at that point is going to be able to do the jobs that 90% of us have better than we ever could, which, following the laws of free markets and capitalism, mean that companies are going to replace humans with more efficient technologies and get rid of people, which if you take away someone's job and purpose, that's going to have a huge impact mentally and on their level of happiness. And people are going to be forced to, just literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of people are going to be displaced from their purpose in their work in life. And they're going to have to find satisfaction, reward, happiness, and fulfillment in new ways from other sources. And if they're not exposed to information, like yours, and they just go about that process haphazardly, I think the vast majority of them are going to fail at that attempt, and they're going to fall into depression. And it's going to be a very interesting new world.
Very much so. And it's scary in a lot of ways and also exciting in a lot of ways. I have a friend that's a dad, like both of us are, and he's got a young son, and I see him with his son, and it's incredible because he's, just so, the house is surrounded by like little easels and little paints and music playing, and just art seems like the big, thick theme in their household. And I say, hey, Francesco is my friend's name. I say, are you also teaching him little cards with 2 + 2 on the front and 4 on the back? And are you teaching, are you also into the sort of reading, writing, and arithmetic and stuff like that? He's like, no, I don't care about that stuff at all. He's like, the only shot my kid's got of succeeding in the new world is based on his creativity. So that's all we nurture in this household. And he says it slightly tongue in cheek, Mike, but he's looking at me slightly cockeyed. He's a smart guy. And I'm like, yeah, there is something to that. The fragmentation of our job skills means that who you are and what you can do is going to be more important than what skills you have.
The best way that I've heard that summed up is the word talent. Mm-hmm. Talent is going to be the single most important thing that, our kids 30 years from now can possibly have. Is what unique talent do you have as an individual that you can bring to the table? Because commoditized tasks and knowledge and skills are going to be exactly that. They're going to be a commodity that are handled by computers. So
that and physiotherapists, right? Because there was that famous list that came out of jobs safe from robots in order, from 1 to whatever, and number 1 was, I think, physiotherapists. It was the least likely to be taken over by a machine anytime soon.
That or programmer, right? The guys who program the robots.
Yes, exactly. Or robot polisher.
Right.
The guy cleans the robot. All these new robot-based jobs.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. What would you like to share with the audience here in the last few minutes that you think will provide the biggest impact with them in their life starting today on their level of happiness that they can apply today and moving forward, even if it's just a 1, 2, 3%, incremental change that over time is just going to have them in a very, very different place. Let's just say 60 to 90 days from now.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Well, listen, I think there's been a common thread that we've had in this conversation, right? We've talked a lot about where we are today as a people and where we're going. And I like that sort of futuristic kind of feeling in this chat. And part of the problem we've talked about with the news and the sort of busyness and hecticness of the world today is that we're all too busy. And so that turns out to be a huge detractor from our own happiness level. In fact, the research says that the average person now gets 147 emails a day, okay, which is really high when you think about the fact that my mom gets 6. So some people out there are probably getting 300 who are listening. And they check their cell phones 150 times a day, which works out to approximately once every 4 minutes. And on top of that, through my own primary research, which I share in the book, the average person's making about close to 300 decisions a day. And I'm talking about where you're going to eat lunch and what you're going to order just as much as Are you going to use the treadmill or the elliptical and do manual, random, or hill? And how are you going to get to work? The point is that decision-making energy, in addition to time, is kind of a one unifying sort of finite resource. And there are sadly only two ways to replenish that decision-making energy. They are sleep and glucose, or anything that turns into glucose in your body, which of course is why at the front of the supermarket, after you've exhausted yourself choosing from 48 kinds of salsa, you've got a slew of candy bars there to like pump you up because you don't even know why, but you're mentally tired. And so why am I telling you all this? Because, your listeners already know that. It's because there is a solution. And to research the happiness equation, I interviewed a number of Fortune 500 CEOs, best-selling authors, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how do you process the overwhelming machine gun firing in your face every day of decisions? Like 300 a day. Come on. And now you add on all the emails and times we're checking our phone. It's like too much. So it turns out there's a simple 2x2 as an answer. And it's a 2x2 that you can picture having time on the vertical axis on the left, going up and down, and importance on the horizontal axis, on the bottom, going left to right. And it turns out that almost every decision we make can be filtered into, of course, taking a certain amount of time and being of a certain importance. And so I'd love to leave your listeners with think about the decisions you make in your life. For low time, low importance decisions, how can you automate them? Okay, how can you follow Waze, W-A-Z-E, the traffic app on your way to work? Whatever dark alley it takes you to, great. You don't have to think about how to get to work anymore. Can you make double dinners and take your leftovers for lunch the next day instead of thinking about whether you want to go in so-and-so's car and go to what restaurant, etc.? Which I paint as a funny example, but for me, at 10 years at Walmart, like every day it was like, who's going to come for lunch? Where are we going to go? It's like it's such a common thing.
The midday crisis, yeah.
Yeah, the most important. Everyone gets excited about it too. Like 5 emails with like voting buttons. Are we going to go to is it Chili's today or it's Friday? Right. Anyway, the point is, forget it. Opt out. What can you automate? What low time, low importance decision can you automate? Then, what low importance, high time decisions? Okay, that's the top left corner of this 2x2. If you can follow, is can you regulate? I have a friend who just wrote a best-selling book on productivity, and he answers all of his emails in a regulated 3 to 4 p.m. window because he's reasoned that everyone emailing him in the morning gets a response, and everyone emailing him late afternoon or evening isn't expecting one till the next day. So he's found that 3 to 4 p.m. is his regulated window. My wife and I live on a street in downtown Toronto in a really old house where something kind of breaks every day or two. And after we moved in there, it was really dragging us down, to be like, this door has to be greased, and I need to replace this cracked garbage can, and something's wrong with the toilet. So instead what we did was we booked ourselves every Saturday, first Saturday of the month for the whole year, 9 to 12, 3 hours. That's it. So again, first Saturday of every month from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And we call that house day. And now we make a list on the inside of one of our kitchen cupboards. And for those 3 hours a month, we just blitz through a regulated window of handling all these annoying decisions in our house. Finally, there's the bottom right quadrant, which is high importance, low time decisions, like picking your kids up from daycare or saying hi to your team in the morning. You have to effectuate those decisions. It's a big word with a small meaning. It just means execute, get it done. You just have to do them. So stop. You don't have to give them any thought. And finally, the reason this model even exists is because what it allows you to do once you have automated, regulated, and effectuated all your other decisions is finally the high time, high importance decisions. You can debate them. You can think about who you want to be with, where you want to work, where do you want to live. Those things take forever to mentally chew on. And what we're doing right now, which is really hurting our happiness in society, is we aren't even giving ourselves time to think about them. Because, you're replying to the tweet and looking at the Facebook newsfeed and thinking about where to go for lunch and can you squeeze in a workout and what should you do at the gym? And I'm at fault for this myself. It's why I wrote about it. But creating space to properly debate big decisions helps you think about life in a slower way, in a more paceful way, and in a more meaningful way. And we know that really increases our happiness level.
Yeah, you're not reacting. You're not in a position of reaction. One of the things along these same lines that I've made a huge impact and a difference for me, and it does on a daily basis, is whether or not the previous night, I sit down and make my list of the 3 to 5 priorities I have for the next day.
Such a simple but profound habit.
Well, it's huge because if I don't do that and I wake up the next day, the first thing I do once I sit at my desk is like get hit by stress of trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do today? What's important? What's my priority list? And it starts you in this really frazzled state. Whereas if you make that priority list the night before, you sleep on it, you wake up, you pull up to your desk, you've done your gratitudes or your smiles, for the the last minute or two, you're in a really positive state. And there you go, you know exactly what your goals are for the day, what you need to accomplish, and it's all laid out for you, and nothing's a surprise. And you can just get to work and be really effective and in a very positive state instead of a reactionary one. So I think that's something that will help you guys and make a huge difference for you as well. Yeah, but man, this is such an important topic. If there's one thing in life that I think matters most, and if there's an actual scoreboard at the end of the day, that a game to be won, I personally believe it would be who has the most days of happiness and the highest level of happiness at the end of your life. I think that is the ultimate win that you can have. So I can't think of a topic that over the long run provides a bigger ROI than this. So Neil, I'm super grateful that you were willing to come on the show and share your knowledge with our audience, and that you've made such a big difference in so many people's lives when it comes to this, because I don't think it's talked about enough. So thank you so much.
Absolutely my pleasure. I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of the conversation. It's hard, even for me, someone who's writing about this and talking about it, to even think about my own happiness on a daily basis, but it's just the benefits are so worth it. And so thank you for making it a topic of conversation for you and your listeners. I appreciate that. Awesome.
So where can people go buy your new book? Where can they connect with you on social media, get on your email list, all of that stuff?
Sure. Globalhappiness.org. I'm serving as the director of the Institute for Global Happiness. Globalhappiness.org is our home. Lots of free resources, tools, courses, etc. And of course, there are links to buy the books and find me on Twitter and everything like that there. By the way, I'll just leave you, Mike. If anyone, there's this like worldwide community, I feel like, of people who listen to the end of the podcast. I'm part of that community. I feel really proud when I get to the end. I'm like, I delete it and the circle is like not a half circle anymore. It's like, yeah, right. I got to the end. So if you made it this far, my email address is Neil, Neil, at globalhappiness.org. I'd love to hear from you, and of course, share anything you had more questions about, pass along any resources we talked about, or anything like that. Awesome. That's super cool. Thank you so much, Neil. I appreciate it, the topic and the discussion today. And guys, make sure you go get a copy of the book, The Happiness Equation. Connect with Neil. There's one person on the planet that, can provide you with inspiration and influence, and to really get you focused on the topic of happiness and increasing that in your life. He is the guy. So thank you so much for listening today, and we'll see y'all next week. Take care.